The courtroom was silent, and that silence felt like death itself. Every breath was held, every eye was fixed on the judge. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of a man's entire life hanging by a single thread. Outside, Lagos buzzed with its usual chaos, Okada riders weaving through traffic, street vendors calling out their wares, generators humming in the distance. But inside this courtroom, time had stopped. Judge Ademi sat behind her bench like a statue carved from stone, her face unreadable, her eyes tired from years of seeing too much injustice and not enough truth. She lifted her gavel slowly, deliberately, and the wooden hammer seemed to carry the weight of the world. Then it fell. The crack echoed off the wooden walls, bouncing through hearts like a gunshot. One word shattered years of devotion, trust, and everything that had ever been sacred in that small family. Guilty. Daniel Summers didn't move. He couldn't. His body had frozen from the inside out, like someone had poured ice water directly into his veins. His mind screamed at him to do something, to protest, to cry out, to demand they look again at the evidence. But his mouth wouldn't open. His legs wouldn't carry him. He just stood there, shaking, feeling the world collapse around him like a building with its foundation ripped away. The bailiff approached from behind, his face carefully neutral, professionally detached. Daniel felt his wrists being pulled behind him, felt the cold metal cuffs snap into place with a click that sounded louder than it should have. The weight of those handcuffs was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on his chest, crushing his heart into pieces. He turned, slowly, painfully. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the prosecutor who had spent weeks painting him as a monster, a man so callous he would let another human being die just to keep his paycheck. He didn't even look at the reporters scribbling frantically in their notebooks, already crafting headlines that would destroy what was left of his name. He only looked for one thing, their faces. His daughters. There they were, standing in the gallery like two bright lights in a room that had gone dark. Grace and Hope Summers. 14 years old, but their eyes looked ancient now, aged by weeks of watching their father being torn apart in public. They stood as still as statues, locked in place by disbelief so profound it had stolen their ability to move. Grace, the older twin by 7 minutes, though she never let Hope forget it, clutched a folder against her chest. It was worn and heavy, its edges bent from being opened and closed 1,000 times. Tear stains marked its cover like battle scars. Her face was set in that expression Daniel knew so well, the one she wore when she was trying desperately not to cry, when she was fighting to be strong even though everything inside her was breaking. Hope, his bold one, his speaker of truth, whispered his name. Daddy. The word came out broken, a cry caught in her throat, strangled by tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people who had already decided he was guilty before the trial even began. The bailiff tugged gently at Daniel's arm, signaling it was time to go. Time to leave this courtroom and enter a cage. Time to become a number instead of a name. But Daniel resisted for just one more moment. He needed them to hear him. He needed them to know. His voice trembled through the courtroom, cracking on every word. Don't let this be the truth they remember. He looked directly at his daughters, ignoring everyone else. Tell them who I am. The heavy doors began to swing shut behind him as the guards led him away. The last thing he heard before those doors slammed closed, before the world swallowed him up and spit out only darkness, was the sound of his daughters' voices, speaking in perfect unison, the way they had since they were Barbies learning their first words. We believe you, we always will. And just like that, Daniel Summers disappeared into the Lagos prison system, leaving behind only doubt, whispers, and a promise that two 14-year-old girls had no idea how to keep. Hey my people, before we go deeper into this story, I need you to do something for me. If you're already feeling this pain, if you're already connected to Daniel and his daughters, drop a like right now. And listen, comment below where you're watching from. Lagos, New York, London, South Africa, Atlanta, wherever you are. Let me know you're here with me on this journey because this story is about to take us places we never expected. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because you're about to join a family that tells real stories, stories that matter. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's go back, because before that gavel fell, before the nightmare began, there was so much love. And you need to understand what these girls were fighting for. Daniel Summers wasn't always weighed down by courtroom greys and jailhouse cuffs. There was a time, not so long ago, when he wore grease-stained overalls and carried a backpack filled with safety manuals, always arriving 10 minutes early to his job at Ironclad Steelworks, one of the largest factories in the Ikja industrial area. He was a single father, widowed too young when his wife Sarah died from complications during the twins' birth. The doctors had tried everything, but sometimes the body just gives up, and all the medicine and prayers in the world can't hold back death when it decides to come calling. Daniel had been 23 years old, holding 2 newborn Barbies in his arms, standing in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and grief, trying to figure out how he was supposed to be both mother and father to these tiny lives that depended entirely on him. But he did it, God knows how, but he did it. He spent his days at the factory, checking machinery for flaws, running diagnostics, filling out safety reports that his supervisors rarely read. His job was simple: make sure the equipment worked properly so nobody got hurt, make sure the conveyor systems ran smoothly, make sure the hydraulic presses didn't malfunction, make sure everyone went home to their families at the end of the day. His nights were spent in their small 2-bedroom apartment in Ojudu Berger, reading bedtime stories under cheap lamps that flickered when the power was unstable, helping with homework at a kitchen table that wobbled unless you folded paper under one leg, teaching his daughters that honesty mattered more than money, and that their word was the most valuable thing they would ever own. Grace and Hope shared everything: shoes, secrets, dreams, fears, but they couldn't have been more different. Grace was quiet, logical, a solver of puzzles. She could spend hours working on math problems or taking apart old electronics just to understand how they worked. She thought before she spoke, analysed before she acted, and kept her emotions locked up tight where they couldn't hurt her. Hope was bold, heart-led, a speaker of truth even when it was hard. She felt everything deeply and wore those feelings on her face for the world to see. She made friends easily, defended the weak without hesitation, and believed with her whole soul that if you just told the truth loudly enough, people would have to listen. They didn't have much. Most weeks stretched every dollar until it screamed, until Daniel was deciding between buying meat for stew or putting more airtime on his phone. Their furniture was second-hand. Their clothes came from Katangua Market. Their television only worked if you hit it in exactly the right spot. But what they had was strong. A home built on honesty, respect, and one golden thread that bound them tighter than blood. Daniel never lied to them. Not once. Not even the small lies parents tell to make life easier. When they asked why Mommy died, he told them the truth in words they could understand. When they asked why they couldn't afford new school uniforms like the other kids, he showed them his pay stub and taught them about budgeting. When they asked if he was lonely, he admitted that yes, sometimes he was, but having them made everything worth it. That honesty became their foundation. It was the one thing they could always count on in a world that seemed designed to disappoint. So when the death happened, when everything changed in the space of a single afternoon, it felt like reality itself had shattered. What really happened on that terrible day at Ironclad Steelworks? Was Daniel Summers truly the monster they claimed he was? Or was someone else pulling the strings, letting an innocent man take the fall while they hid in the shadows? The answer would cost more than anyone expected. And the truth was buried so deep, it would take 2 young girls with nothing to lose to dig it up from the darkness. It started like any other Tuesday morning in Lagos. Daniel woke up at 5 o'clock, the way he always did, before the sun had fully risen and before the city's chaos could swallow the quiet. He made breakfast, bread and eggs, nothing fancy, and packed lunches for the girls in containers that had been washed and reused so many times the plastic had gone cloudy. Grace ate while reading a textbook, already studying for an exam that was 2 weeks away. Hope hummed along to a song playing on her phone, her uniform tie loose around her neck because she hated feeling like she was being strangled. "Remember, Dad picks us up at 4 today," Grace said without looking up from her book. "Science fair setup." Daniel smiled, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "I wouldn't miss it for anything. You two have been working on that volcano project for months." "It's not a volcano," Hope corrected him, rolling her eyes but grinning. "It's a water filtration system using local materials. We're going to win this thing." "That's my girls," Daniel said, kissing each of them on the forehead before grabbing his backpack and heading out the door. Smart and ready to change the world. He took 2 buses to get to Ikja, standing for most of the journey because the vehicles were packed with bodies pressed against bodies, everyone trying to get to work before the morning rush turned the roads into parking lots. By the time he walked through the gates of Ironclad Steelworks, his shirt was already damp with sweat, but he was 10 minutes early, just like always. The factory floor was massive, a cathedral of metal and noise. Conveyor belts stretched the length of football fields, carrying sheets of steel that would be cut, pressed, shaped, and welded into parts for construction projects all over West Africa. The machinery roared like living beasts, Hydraulic presses slamming down with enough force to flatten a car, sparks flying from welding stations like fireworks in the dim industrial light. Daniel went straight to his station, signed in, and began his morning inspection routine. He moved methodically, checking gauges, testing emergency stops, examining conveyor rollers for wear and tear. It was tedious work, the kind that made your eyes tired and your back ache, but it was important. Lives depended on these machines working properly. That's when he found it. Conveyor line 7, the main transport system that carried finished steel sheets to the loading dock, had a problem. The emergency brake mechanism was loose, the bolts holding it in place worn down to almost nothing. Daniel crouched down, his flashlight illuminating the fault, and his stomach dropped. This wasn't just a minor issue. If that brake failed while the system was running at full speed and someone was working near the belt. He didn't want to finish that thought. Daniel pulled out his tablet and logged the issue immediately, marking it as a critical priority. He took photos, documented the exact location, and submitted a formal complaint through the company's safety reporting system. Then he walked straight to his supervisor's office. Emmanuel Okonkwo was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s who had worked his way up from the factory floor to management. He sat behind a desk covered in paperwork, a fan blowing hot air around the small office because the air conditioning had been broken for months and nobody bothered to fix it. "Emmanuel, we need to shut down line 7, Daniel said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The emergency brake is compromised, it's dangerous." Emmanuel looked up from his computer, annoyed at the interruption. "How dangerous?" "Someone could die dangerously." "You logged it in the system." "Yes, just now, but we can't wait for approval. We need to shut it down today." Emmanuel leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Daniel, you know how this works. I submit the report, it goes to safety review, they schedule an inspection, then maintenance handles it. We can't just shut down production because of a loose bolt." "It's not just a loose bolt," Daniel insisted, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "The whole mechanism is failing, if we keep running that line." "I'll fast-track the report," Emmanuel interrupted, holding up a hand. "But line 7 stays operational until we get clearance from upstairs. We have deadlines, Daniel. The Lekki project needs those steel sheets by Friday, and if we fall behind, heads will roll. You understand?" Daniel understood. He understood that money mattered more than safety. He understood that deadlines trumped lives. He understood that speaking up made you inconvenient, made you the problem instead of the person trying to prevent one. But he also understood that he couldn't stay silent. "Then put it in writing," Daniel said quietly. "I want documentation that I reported this and you chose to keep the line running." Emmanuel's face hardened. "Are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm protecting myself. And I'm trying to protect the men working that line." "Get back to work, Daniel." Daniel left the office, his hands shaking with frustration and fear. He couldn't force them to shut down the line. He didn't have that authority. All he could do was document everything, build a paper trail, and hope that someone with power would actually care before it was too late. He spent the rest of his shift double-checking other equipment, but his mind kept drifting back to line 7. He could hear it running, the familiar rumble and clank of metal on metal, and every sound made his chest tighten with anxiety. At 3:30 he clocked out early, something he rarely did, because he had promised his daughters he would help them set up their science fair project. As he walked out of the factory, he turned back one more time, looking at the massive building, at the smoke rising from its chimneys, at the workers moving in and out like ants serving a queen. Everything looked normal, everything looked fine. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. "Fam, if you're feeling this tension building, if you can sense that something bad is coming, I need you to show me you're invested. Hit that like button right now. And listen, drop a comment telling me, have you ever tried to warn someone about danger and they didn't listen? Have you ever been in Daniel's position, knowing something was wrong but feeling powerless to stop it? Subscribe if you haven't already, because this story is about to get darker before it gets better, and you need to be here for every twist and turn. Now let's get back to what happened next, because Daniel had no idea that while he was helping his daughters build a better future, someone else was building his destruction. Grace and Hope were already at the school when Daniel arrived, their water filtration project spread out on a table in the assembly hall. Other students and parents milled around, setting up experiments and displays, the air filled with excited chatter and last-minute panic. "Dad," Hope called out, waving him over. "Come see, we got the filter working perfectly." For the next hour, Daniel forgot about work. He forgot about conveyor line 7 and Emmanuel's dismissive attitude and the gnawing fear in his gut. He was just a father, helping his brilliant daughters explain how their system could purify dirty water using sand, gravel, and activated charcoal, materials anyone could find or make, even in villages without electricity or running water. This could actually help people, Grace said softly, her eyes shining with pride. Like really help them. It already is, Daniel told her, pulling both girls close. Because you're learning that you can make a difference, that's the most important thing. They took photos together, all three of them grinning at the camera. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Emmanuel. Need you tomorrow, early shift, but he ignored it. Right now his daughters were his priority. Work could wait. They ate dinner at a small bukker near the school, rice and stew served on plastic plates, laughing about Hope's teacher who always fell asleep during assembly and Grace's classmate who tried to impress girls with terrible magic tricks. It was perfect. It was normal. It was exactly the kind of evening that made all the struggle worthwhile. Daniel dropped them back at the apartment around 7, kissed them goodnight, and reminded them to finish their homework before bed. I love you both more than anything in this world, he said, the way he always did. We love you too, Dad, they chorused back. He had no way of knowing those would be the last normal words they would share for a very long time. At 11:47 that night, while Daniel was sleeping and his daughters were whispering secrets in the darkness of their shared room, something went catastrophically wrong at Ironclad Steelworks. Conveyor line 7, still running despite Daniel's warnings, finally gave up its fight. The emergency brake mechanism failed completely, just as he had predicted. The belt, carrying half a ton of steel sheets at high speed, became an unstoppable force. And Chidi Okafor, a 52-year-old maintenance worker with 3 children and a grandchild on the way, was standing in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. The sound of the accident echoed through the empty factory like thunder. Alarms screamed. Emergency lights flooded the building with red. Workers came running from every direction, but by the time they reached him, it was already too late. Chidi Okafor died at 11:53, crushed beneath machinery that should have stopped but didn't, killed by a failure that someone had documented and someone else had ignored. And when the investigation began, when the police and the safety inspectors and the lawyers started digging through records and asking questions, they found Daniel Summers' name on every report, every complaint, every document. But they didn't find the warnings he had given. They didn't find his pleas to shut down the line. They didn't find Emmanuel's decision to keep production running. Instead, they found something else entirely. Something impossible. Something that would destroy everything Daniel had built and turn him from a hero who had tried to prevent disaster into a villain who had caused it. What did they find in those files that made everyone believe Daniel was guilty? And who had the power and the motive to rewrite history and bury the truth so deep it might never surface? The answer was already destroying Daniel's life while he slept, unaware that tomorrow morning, police officers would be knocking on his door, ready to take him away in handcuffs while his daughters watched in horror. The nightmare had only just begun. The knock came at 6 in the morning, loud and aggressive, the kind of pounding that makes your heart jump before your brain fully wakes up. Daniel stumbled out of bed, disoriented and confused, pulling on a shirt as he made his way to the door. Grace and Hope emerged from their room, hair messy from sleep, their eyes wide with concern because nobody knocked like that unless something was very wrong. "Who is it?" Daniel called out, his hand on the door handle. "Lagos State Police. Open the door, Mr. Summers." Daniel's blood turned cold. He looked back at his daughters, saw the fear blooming on their faces and tried to smile reassuringly even though his own hands were shaking. "It's okay," he whispered, though he had no idea if that was true. "Stay here." He opened the door to find 4 police officers standing in the narrow hallway, their faces hard and professional. The one in front, a sergeant with tribal marks on his cheeks and eyes that had seen too much darkness, held up an official-looking document. "Daniel Summers, you are under arrest for criminal negligence resulting in death and document fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words hit Daniel like physical blows. "What? No, there must be some mistake. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "Dad," Hope screamed, rushing forward, but Grace grabbed her sister and held her back, her logical mind understanding that fighting would only make things worse even though everything inside her wanted to protect their father. "Listen to me," Daniel said urgently as the handcuffs clicked into place, the metal biting into his wrists. "There was an accident at the factory, wasn't there? Someone died. I tried to prevent it. I reported the problem. Check the records." "We did check the records, Mr. Summers," the sergeant said, his voice flat and emotionless. "That's why you're being arrested." They led him out of the apartment in handcuffs, neighbors peeking out from behind partially opened doors, their faces filled with shock and judgment, and the kind of curiosity that makes tragedy into entertainment. Daniel kept his head up, kept his eyes on his daughters who stood in the doorway crying, kept trying to project strength even as everything crumbled around him. "Call Mr. Adelek," he shouted back at them, naming their neighbor who was a lawyer though not a very good one. "Tell him what happened. I'll be okay, I promise." But as the police van pulled away, taking him toward a future that looked darker than anything he could imagine, Daniel wondered if that promise was the first lie he had ever told his daughters. The media descended on the story like vultures on a corpse. By noon, news vans were parked outside their apartment building. By evening, Daniel's face was on every television screen in Lagos, his name attached to headlines that made him sound like a monster. Factory safety officer ignored warnings, worker dies. Negligent employee faces murder charges. Deadly greed at ironclad steelworks. Grace and Hope sat on their worn couch, watching their father being destroyed in real time, listening to reporters who had never met him explain to the world what kind of person he was. Cold, careless, willing to let a man die to protect his job. "They're lying," Hope said, her voice shaking with rage and tears. "They're lying about everything. Dad would never." "I know," Grace interrupted, but her voice was distant, her mind already working through the problem like it was a math equation she needed to solve. "Something's wrong. This doesn't make sense." Their Aunt Margaret arrived that evening, their father's older sister who they barely knew because she had moved to Abuja years ago and rarely visited. She was tall and thin, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, and she moved through their apartment like she was inspecting a crime scene. "Pack your things," she said without preamble, without hugging them or asking if they were okay. "You're coming to stay with me until this mess gets sorted out." "We want to stay here," Grace said firmly. "This is our home." "This is a crime scene," Margaret corrected her, gesturing at the chaos around them. The police had torn through the apartment, searching for evidence, leaving drawers open and papers scattered. "And you're minors, you can't live alone. Pack your things, we leave in an hour." Hope opened her mouth to argue, but Grace squeezed her sister's hand hard, a silent message: "Don't fight, not yet. Save your strength for the battles that matter." They packed their lives into 2 suitcases and 3 boxes, trying to decide what was essential and what could be left behind. Grace grabbed her laptop, the one their father had saved for months to buy her last birthday, a slightly used model from Computer Village that still worked perfectly. Hope packed her notebooks, filled with stories and poems and dreams she had written in her messy handwriting. And together they took the folder, the one their father kept in his study, the one labeled Work Documents Important. They didn't know exactly what was inside, but instinct told them it mattered. Instinct told them their father had been preparing for something, protecting himself somehow, and whatever was in that folder might be the only weapon they had. Margaret's house in Abuja was large and cold, filled with expensive furniture that nobody was allowed to sit on, and decorations that were meant to impress visitors rather than make anyone feel welcome. She had money. Her late husband had been a contractor who died wealthy. But she had no warmth, no softness, no understanding of what it meant to be a child whose entire world had just been ripped apart. "You'll stay in the guest room," she told them, pointing down a long hallway. "Don't touch anything in the rest of the house. Don't make noise, don't invite friends over, and don't talk to reporters. The last thing this family needs is more scandal." "Can we visit Dad?" Hope asked, her voice small and desperate. "Absolutely not. He's a criminal awaiting trial. You need to distance yourselves from him." "He's our father," Grace said, her quiet voice carrying more steel than her aunt expected. Margaret turned to face them fully, her expression hard. "Your father destroyed this family's reputation. He killed a man through negligence and fraud. The evidence is overwhelming. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can move on with your lives." "He's innocent," Hope insisted, her voice rising. "Then why is he in jail?" Margaret shot back. "Why do all the documents have his signature? Why did he approve equipment he knew was faulty? Wake up, girls, your father isn't who you thought he was." She left them alone then, closing the door behind her with a finality that sounded like a coffin being sealed. Hope immediately burst into tears, the kind of deep, soul-wrenching sobs that come from a heart being torn in half. Grace held her sister, her own tears falling silently, and they cried together in that cold guest room that smelled like cleaning products and emptiness. "We have to do something," Hope finally whispered, her voice hoarse. We can't just let them destroy him. I know, Grace said, and her mind was already spinning, already formulating a plan that she didn't fully understand yet. But we need to be smart. We need evidence. We need proof. That night, after Margaret had gone to bed, Grace opened her laptop and began to dig. Hey, my people, I need you to feel what these girls are feeling right now. Imagine being 14 years old and watching your whole world collapse. Imagine everyone telling you that the person you love most is a monster. Drop a like if your heart is breaking for Grace and hope. And comment below, would you believe your father if the whole world said he was guilty? Would you fight even when it seemed impossible? Subscribe to this family because these girls are about to show us what real courage looks like. Now let's see what Grace found when she started searching for the truth, because what she discovered would change everything. Grace wasn't a hacker, not really, but she was smart, curious, and determined, and she had spent years learning how computers worked because puzzles made sense to her in ways that people often didn't. She understood systems and logic and patterns, and she knew that digital information left traces, breadcrumbs that could be followed if you knew where to look. She started with the news articles, reading every single one, taking notes on what they claimed her father had done. According to the reports, Daniel Summers had received multiple complaints about Conveyor Line 7. He had inspected the equipment and found it faulty. But instead of shutting it down or reporting it properly, he had signed documents approving it for continued use. Documents that were time-stamped and authenticated with his digital signature. The prosecution had emails allegedly sent from his work account, safety forms with his name on them, and server logs showing he had accessed the files just hours before the accident. It looked damning. It looked like a man who had chosen his paycheck over someone's life. But Grace knew her father. She knew him in her bones, in her blood, in every memory she had of him reading to them at bedtime and teaching them that honesty was the only currency that mattered. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that he would never do what they claimed. So if the evidence said he was guilty, and she knew he was innocent, then the evidence had to be wrong. Or worse, it had to be fake. Grace logged into her father's email account. She still knew his password because he had never hidden anything from them, had trusted them with everything. Most of his messages were exactly what she expected: work schedules, safety reports, emails to the girls' teachers. But when she looked at the messages the prosecution claimed he had sent, something jumped out at her immediately. The metadata was wrong. Every email has hidden information attached to it: the IP address it was sent from, the exact timestamp down to the second, the type of device used to send it. Grace had learned about this in her computer class, had done a project on digital forensics that had earned her the highest grade in the class. The emails that supposedly proved her father's guilt had been sent from an IP address that didn't match his usual login location. His normal work emails came from the factory floor, from a specific terminal in the safety office. But these suspicious emails, the ones approving the faulty equipment, came from somewhere else entirely. She cross-referenced the IP address using online tools, feeling her heart pound faster as the location slowly revealed itself. The emails had been sent from inside the administrative building, from the corner office on the 3rd floor. Grace's hands shook as she wrote down the information. She didn't know who worked in that office, didn't know what this meant exactly, but she knew it was important. She knew her father couldn't have sent those emails because he had never even been inside that building. Maintenance and safety personnel weren't allowed on the administrative floors. It was company policy. She kept digging, accessing public records and archived server logs that the factory was required to maintain by law. The more she looked, the more inconsistencies she found. Timestamps that didn't match, documents that appeared to have been edited after they were supposedly filed, safety reports that had been deleted and then restored with different information. Someone had tampered with the evidence. Someone with access to the company's internal systems had framed her father, carefully building a case against him while erasing their own involvement. But who and why? Grace didn't have those answers yet, but she knew someone who might. The next morning, while Margaret was at church, a 3-hour service she attended religiously every Sunday, Grace and Hope sneaked out of the house. They took a bus back to Lagos, back to Ojudu Berger, back to the only place where they might find the truth. They went looking for the people who had worked alongside their father, the men and women who knew what really happened on the factory floor, the witnesses who might be brave enough to speak up if someone just asked them the right questions. Hope had always been good with people, good at getting them to open up and trust her. And she was about to put that skill to the test in ways she never imagined. But finding the truth is dangerous when someone powerful has worked so hard to bury it. And the girls had no idea that by asking questions, by digging into secrets that were supposed to stay hidden, They were painting targets on their own backs. Who was powerful enough to frame an innocent man and destroy all the evidence? And how far would they go to protect themselves if two teenage girls started threatening to expose them? The answer would put Grace and Hope in more danger than they could possibly understand. But they were their father's daughters, and they had inherited his stubborn refusal to stay silent when silence meant letting evil win. The war for truth had officially begun. The bus ride back to Lagos felt like it took forever, every pothole and traffic jam stretching time into something unbearable. Grace sat by the window, her folder clutched against her chest like armor, her mind running through everything she had discovered. Hope sat beside her, nervous energy radiating from her body, her leg bouncing up and down in that way it always did when she was anxious. "What if nobody wants to talk to us?" Hope whispered, voicing the fear they both carried. "What if they're all too scared?" "Then we keep trying," Grace answered, her voice steady even though her insides felt like water. "We don't have a choice." They got off the bus at Ojudu Berger and walked through streets that used to feel like home but now felt strange and hostile. People stared at them, the daughters of the man on television, the girls whose father had killed someone. Some faces showed pity, others showed disgust. A few showed something worse. Satisfaction, like they were happy to see someone else's family destroyed because it made their own problems seem smaller. The girls kept their heads down and walked faster. Their first stop was Mama Ngozi's Buka, a small restaurant near the factory where workers came to eat lunch because the food was cheap and good, and Mama Ngozi never judged anyone, no matter how dirty their clothes or how little money they had. She was stirring a massive pot of egusi soup when they walked in, her wrapper tied tight around her waist, sweat beading on her forehead from the heat of the coal stove. "Ah," she exclaimed when she saw them, dropping her ladle and rushing over. "Grace, Hope, what are you doing here? I heard you went to Abuja with your auntie." "We came back to find the truth," Hope said simply, because she had never learned how to hide what she was feeling or why she was doing something. "About our father, about what really happened." Mama Ngozi's face changed, the warmth draining away and being replaced by something that looked like fear. "Ah, my children, this is not something you should be involved in. Your father's matter is in the hands of the law now." "The law got it wrong," Grace said quietly. "And we can prove it, but we need help. We need to talk to people who worked with Dad, people who know what he was really like, people who might have seen something that could help us." Mama Ngozi glanced around her small restaurant nervously, even though there were no other customers at this hour. She lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "Listen to me carefully. Some things are bigger than the truth. Some people are more powerful than justice. You understand? If your father went down for this, there's a reason. And poking around in that reason could get you hurt." "We don't care," Hope said fiercely. "He's our father, we can't just abandon him." Something softened in Mama Ngozi's eyes then, something that looked like respect mixed with deep sadness. She sighed heavily, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "There's a man, old Jeremiah. He used to be a cleaner at the factory, worked there for almost 30 years before they retired him last year. He lives in a room behind St. Paul's Church near the market. He knew your father well. He might talk to you. But be careful, you hear, be very careful." They thanked her and left, following her directions through the crowded streets of Ojudu until they found the church. A small white building with a rusty zinc roof and faded paintings of Jesus on the walls. Behind it, in a row of tiny rooms that were rented to people who couldn't afford better, they found old Jeremiah. He was sitting outside his door on a wooden stool, smoking a cigarette and watching the world go by with eyes that had seen too much. He must have been in his 70s, his face lined with decades of hard work, his hands gnarled and scarred from years of cleaning factory floors and handling industrial waste. "Old Jeremiah," Grace called out softly, approaching carefully. He looked up at them, squinting in the afternoon sun. "Who's asking?" "We're Daniel Summers' daughters." The name hit him like a punch. His entire body went rigid, and for a moment Grace thought he might send them away. But then something shifted in his expression, something that looked like pain and guilt and a secret he had been carrying for too long. "Come inside," he said finally, standing up slowly, his joints creaking with the movement. "We shouldn't talk out here where everyone can hear." His room was tiny, a bed, a chair, a small table, and not much else. But it was clean, organized with the precision of a man who had spent his life making order out of chaos. He gestured for them to sit on the bed while he took the chair, studying their faces with an intensity that made Hope uncomfortable. "You look like him," old Jeremiah said finally. "Both of you got his eyes, his stubborn chin." He took a long drag from his cigarette. "I suppose you came here looking for the truth." "Yes, sir," Grace said, pulling out her folder and opening it to show him the printouts she had made, the evidence of tampered emails and suspicious timestamps. Our father was framed. We know it. But we need someone who was there, someone who can tell us what really happened. Old Jeremiah was quiet for a long time, so long that Hope started to think he wouldn't say anything at all. But then he started talking, and once he began, the words poured out like water from a broken dam. Fam, what old Jeremiah is about to tell these girls will change everything. But before we hear his story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now if you believe in fighting for truth even when the whole world is against you. Comment below and tell me, have you ever had someone lie about you and nobody believed your side? That's what Daniel is going through right now, sitting in a cell, knowing he's innocent but watching everyone treat him like a criminal. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this story is about to reveal secrets that powerful people wanted buried forever. Now let's hear what old Jeremiah knows, because his testimony might be the key to saving Daniel's life. Your father was a good man, old Jeremiah began, his voice rough with emotion and tobacco smoke. One of the few at that factory who actually cared about people more than production numbers. Do you know how rare that is? In a place where everything is about money and deadlines and keeping the bosses happy, your father actually gave a damn if the machines were safe, if the workers went home alive. We know, Hope said softly. That's why we know he didn't do what they said. He didn't, old Jeremiah confirmed, leaning forward with intensity. Let me tell you what really happened, what nobody wants to say out loud because saying it could get them killed or worse. Your father wasn't the first person to report problems with that conveyor system. There had been complaints for months, from workers, from other safety officers, from maintenance people like me who saw the equipment failing and knew it was only a matter of time before disaster struck. Grace pulled out a notebook and started writing, her hand moving quickly across the page. Do you remember who else filed complaints? I remember one man specifically, Tund back here. He was a senior maintenance engineer, had been at the factory for 15 years. He sent multiple emails to management about the conveyor system, wrote detailed reports explaining exactly what was wrong and how much it would cost to fix. But fixing it meant shutting down production for at least a week, meant losing money, meant missing deadlines. So they ignored him. What happened to Tund back here? Grace asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be bad. Old Jeremiah's face darkened. They fired him, about 3 months before the accident, made up some excuse about poor performance, but everyone knew the real reason. He was making too much noise, asking too many questions, refusing to sign off on equipment he knew was dangerous. So they got rid of him, made an example out of him so the rest of us would know what happens when you put safety over profit. Hope felt anger burning in her chest, hot and righteous. Where is he now? Can we talk to him? He moved back to his village in Ogun State after they fired him. Lost his house, lost his savings trying to fight the termination, eventually just gave up and left Lagos. I don't know if he'd be willing to testify. They broke him pretty badly. But if Dad was reporting the same problems, why did they blame him instead of listening? Grace asked, trying to piece together the timeline in her mind. Old Jeremiah smiled sadly. That's the question, isn't it? Your father made his reports through the proper channels, documented everything the way you're supposed to. But here's what nobody's talking about. Those reports never made it past his direct supervisor. Emmanuel Okonkwo, you know him. Both girls nodded. They had met Emmanuel a few times when they visited their father at work. He had seemed nice enough, always smiling, always promising their father that things would get better. Emmanuel Okonkwo is a company man through and through, old Jeremiah continued, his voice heavy with contempt. He does whatever the executives tell him to do, no matter who gets hurt. When your father reported the problems, Emmanuel told him it was handled, told him the reports were being forwarded to the right people. But they weren't. Emmanuel was burying them, hiding them, making sure they never reached anyone who might actually shut down production. Why would he do that? Hope asked, though she was starting to understand the ugly truth. Money, bonuses, promotions. The factory rewards managers who keep production running smoothly and punishes those who cause delays. If Emmanuel had actually forwarded those safety complaints and the line got shut down, he would have been blamed for the lost revenue. So he chose his career over people's lives. Simple as that. Grace felt sick. So when the accident happened and Chidi Okafor died, they needed someone to blame. Exactly, and your father was perfect for it. He had his name on all the safety reports so they could claim he knew about the problems. They just had to change a few details, alter some timestamps, create emails that made it look like he had approved the equipment for continued use. And Emmanuel had access to everything, your father's login credentials, his digital signature, the internal systems where all the documentation was stored. It would have been easy for him to create fake evidence. But why frame Dad specifically? Hope asked. Why not just say it was an accident and nobody's fault? Old Jeremiah's expression turned even darker. Because there was an investigation coming. The government was looking into safety violations at the factory, and they needed someone to take the fall. If they admitted the company had ignored multiple warnings, if they admitted management had deliberately chosen profit over safety, the whole factory could have been shut down. Criminal charges could have been filed against the executives. We're talking about millions of naira in fines, maybe even prison time for the people at the top. So they sacrificed our father to protect themselves, Grace said, her voice shaking with fury. Your father and his reputation. They made him the villain so they could be the victims. And it worked. The investigation focused on Daniel Summers, the negligent safety officer, and ignored everyone else who had blood on their hands. Hope was crying now, tears of rage streaming down her face. How do we prove it? How do we make people see what really happened? That's the hard part, old Jeremiah admitted. Most of the people who know the truth are too scared to talk. They saw what happened to Tundbakia, saw what happened to your father, and they know speaking up means losing everything. But there might be one person who could help you. Someone who has evidence that even Emmanuel Okonkwo couldn't destroy. Who? Grace asked urgently. The IT administrator. A woman named Patricia Chen. She's in charge of all the computer systems at the factory, all the servers, all the backups. If anyone modified documents or created fake emails, there would be a digital trail. Patricia would know how to find it. Will she talk to us? Old Jeremiah shrugged. I don't know. She's always been quiet, kept her head down, did her job without making waves. But she's also not stupid. She knows what happened wasn't right. The question is whether she's brave enough to do something about it, or whether she'll choose safety over justice like most people do. He gave them Patricia's contact information, a phone number and an address in Ikja. Then he walked them to the door, his hand heavy on Hope's shoulder. Be careful, he said again, and this time his voice carried real fear. You're playing with fire, and the people you're up against have power you can't imagine. They've already destroyed one life. They won't hesitate to destroy 3 more if you get too close to the truth. We have to try, Grace said simply. He's our father. Old Jeremiah nodded slowly. Your father was right about you too. He used to talk about you all the time when we worked night shifts together. Said his daughters were going to change the world someday. I think he might have been right. They left old Jeremiah's room with more information than they had arrived with, but also with a heavier burden. The conspiracy was bigger than they had imagined, involving multiple people, systematic cover-ups, and a company willing to let an innocent man rot in prison to protect their profits. As they walked back through the streets toward the bus station, Hope suddenly grabbed Grace's arm, pulling her to a stop. Someone's following us, she whispered. Grace turned slowly, casually, trying not to look obvious. And there, about 20 meters behind them, partially hidden behind a newspaper stand, was a man in a dark shirt watching them with eyes that held nothing good. Walk faster, Grace said quietly. Don't run, don't let him know we've noticed. They picked up their pace, weaving through the crowded market, using the chaos of afternoon shopping to try and lose their tail. Grace's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Hope's hand was sweaty in hers, gripping tight enough to hurt. They ducked into a shop selling fabrics, pretending to look at wrappers and Ankara prints while keeping an eye on the entrance. The man walked past, slowly, his head turning as he searched for them. Then he stopped just outside, pulled out a phone and made a call. Who was he reporting to? How did they know the girls were investigating? And what would happen if they got caught before they could reach Patricia Chen and get the evidence they needed? The truth was close now, so close Grace could almost taste it. But danger was closer, breathing down their necks, ready to silence them before they could save their father. Time was running out. And in a city as big as Lagos, 2 14-year-old girls could disappear without anyone noticing until it was far too late. Grace and Hope stayed in that fabric shop for almost an hour, pretending to browse through Ankara prints and lace materials, while the shopkeeper kept giving them suspicious looks. Through the window, they could see the man in the dark shirt packing back and forth, occasionally speaking into his phone, his eyes scanning the crowded street like a hawk searching for prey. We can't stay here forever, Hope whispered, her voice tight with fear. The shopkeeper is getting annoyed. Grace's mind was racing, calculating options, trying to think like the problem solver she had always been. There's a back exit, she said quietly, noticing a narrow doorway behind the counter that led to what looked like a storage area. If we can convince her to let us through. Excuse me, Ma, Hope said, turning to the shopkeeper with tears already forming in her eyes. It wasn't hard to cry. The fear was real, the danger was real, and Hope had always been able to access her emotions when she needed them. "Please, we need help. That man outside, he's been following us. We're scared." The shopkeeper was a heavy woman in her 50s with kind eyes that had probably seen too many bad things happen to young girls in Lagos. She looked at them more carefully now, really seeing them for the first time, and something in their faces must have convinced her they were telling the truth. "Come," she said simply, waving them behind the counter. "There's a path through the back that leads to the next street. Go quickly and don't look back." They thanked her with voices choked with gratitude and slipped through the storage area, past boxes of fabric and old sewing machines, out into a narrow alley that smelled like garbage and standing water. They ran, their school bags bouncing against their backs, their lungs burning with exertion and fear, not stopping until they were 3 streets away, and the man in the dark shirt was nowhere to be seen. Only then did they allow themselves to slow down, gasping for breath, leaning against a wall while their hearts tried to remember how to beat normally. "They know," Grace said between breaths. "Somehow they know we're asking questions, which means we're getting close to something they don't want us to find. Which means we have to move faster," Hope added, straightening up despite the fear still coursing through her body. "Before they can stop us." They found a phone charging kiosk and used the attendant's phone to call Patricia Chen, the IT administrator old Jeremiah had told them about. Grace's hands shook as she dialed the number, not knowing if this woman would help them or hang up or worse, report them to whoever was trying to keep them silent. The phone rang 4 times before a cautious voice answered. "Hello. Ms. Patricia Chen?" Grace asked, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Who is this?" "My name is Grace Summers. My sister Hope is here with me. We're Daniel Summers' daughters." There was a long silence on the other end, so long that Grace thought the call had been disconnected. But then Patricia spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you get this number?" "Old Jeremiah gave it to us. He said you might be able to help us prove our father's innocence." Another pause, then, "I can't talk on this line, it's not secure. Where are you?" Grace gave her the intersection they were near. Patricia was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There's a library on Allen Avenue, the public one near the roundabout. Meet me there in 1 hour. Don't tell anyone where you're going, and make sure you're not followed." The line went dead. The library was old and dusty, filled with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades, and computers so ancient they probably still ran Windows XP. But it was quiet and relatively empty, just a few university students studying in corners and a librarian who barely looked up when Grace and Hope walked in. Patricia Chen arrived exactly on time, which somehow didn't surprise Grace. She was a small woman in her early 30s, wearing glasses and a simple dress, the kind of person you could walk past 100 times and never notice. But her eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as she scanned the library to make sure they were alone. "Follow me," she said quietly, leading them to a back corner where the shelves blocked them from view of the entrance. She sat down at one of the ancient computers and gestured for them to pull up chairs beside her. "You have 10 minutes. Tell me why I should risk my career and possibly my life to help you." Grace didn't waste time. She pulled out her folder and laid out everything they had discovered, the suspicious email timestamps, the IP addresses that didn't match, the testimony from old Jeremiah about Emmanuel Okonkwo burying safety reports. She spoke quickly and clearly, presenting the evidence like she was giving a school presentation, except this presentation could save her father's life or get them all killed. Patricia listened without interrupting, her face revealing nothing. When Grace finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the desk in a nervous rhythm. "You're right," she finally said. "About all of it. The evidence was tampered with, documents were altered, emails were fabricated, I've known since the beginning." Hope's breath caught in her throat. "Then why didn't you say anything? Why did you let our father go to jail for something he didn't do?" Patricia's face crumpled slightly, guilt and shame washing over her features. "Because I'm a coward. Because I have a daughter of my own to feed and school fees to pay and a mother with diabetes who needs expensive medicine. Because I saw what they did to Tund Bakya and your father, and I knew if I spoke up, I'd be next. So I kept my head down and told myself it wasn't my problem, that someone else would find the truth, that maybe your father had good lawyers who would figure it out." "But they didn't," Grace said, her voice hard with anger she was trying to control. "And now our father is sitting in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and a man is dead, and the people responsible are getting away with everything." "I know," Patricia whispered, tears forming behind her glasses. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I see your father's face on the news and I can't sleep at night. I think about my own daughter and what I would want someone to do if she were in your position. And I know I've been wrong. I know I've been weak." "Then help us now," Hope pleaded, reaching out to touch Patricia's hand. "Please, it's not too late to do the right thing." Patricia took off her glasses and wiped her eyes. Then she took a deep breath, and Grace could see her making the decision, could see her choosing courage over safety for the first time in her life. "Okay," Patricia said. "Okay, but you need to understand how dangerous this is. The person who orchestrated this cover-up isn't Emmanuel Okonkwo, he's just a puppet. The real power behind this is Victor Oladel, the factory's chief operating officer. He's a ruthless man with connections to politicians, police officers and judges. He's the one who ordered the evidence to be altered. He's the one who made sure your father took the fall." Grace felt her blood run cold. Victor Oladel was a name she recognized from the news, a wealthy businessman, a philanthropist who donated to charities and shook hands with governors. The kind of man who seemed untouchable. "Why would he do it?" Grace asked. "Why would someone that powerful care about one safety officer?" "Because it wasn't just about one safety officer," Patricia explained, leaning forward and lowering her voice even more. "The government investigation I told you about, it was bigger than anyone knew. They were looking into systematic safety violations across multiple factories owned by Oladel's company. If the truth came out about how many corners he'd cut, how many regulations he'd violated, he would have lost everything. His business empire, his reputation, possibly his freedom. So when that accident happened, he saw an opportunity. Frame one man, make him the villain, and the investigation would focus on individual negligence instead of corporate corruption. And he had the power to make it happen," Grace said, understanding clicking into place like puzzle pieces. "He had everything he needed. Access to the company's digital systems through me, though I didn't know what he was using my access for until it was too late. Control over Emmanuel Okonkwo and other managers who would do anything to keep their jobs. Money to pay off anyone who needed convincing. Your father never stood a chance against that kind of power. My people, can you feel how big this is getting? This isn't just about one innocent man anymore. This is about corruption at the highest levels, about powerful people who think they can destroy anyone who gets in their way. If this story is gripping you, if you're feeling that anger in your chest, hit that like button right now. And fam, drop a comment. Have you ever felt powerless against someone with money and connections? That's what these girls are up against right now. Subscribe if you believe truth can win, even when power tries to bury it. Because what happens next will either save Daniel Summers or destroy everything these girls have been fighting for. Now let's see what evidence Patricia has that could finally bring down Victor Oladel and his empire of lies. If you enjoyed the first part of this story, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notification bell. So when part 2 drops, you'll be the first to know. And hey, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story is traveling across the world.